Today is the day, hopefully, that we start my Dodge Demon Swapped SRT10 truck for the very first time. We've already got the drivetrain in place, the fuel system, cooling, exhaust intake, it's all ready to go. The only thing we have left to do now is install our new ECU. Oh, and we have to wire the entire truck. Yeah, while we might have figured out the hardware side of everything, now we have to make it work, which I'm sure will be a smooth, trouble-free experience resulting in no cussing whatsoever. Hey, a little false optimism never hurt anybody. Now, before we get to laying any actual wiring, we gotta take care of mounting our hard parts. Stuff like the pedal, our gauge cluster, and the brains of this whole operation, our Holley Dominator ECU. With our pedal and our dashboard, we don't really need to put too much thought into where we're gonna mount those. Those ones are, well, pretty self-explanatory. Our ECU, though, we can technically mount this anywhere. Our only real limitation here is the length of our engine wiring harness. These are our ECU connectors, and assuming we mount the computer inside, by the time we get down the harness to where it splits here, we need to be back in the engine bay. As for where we can house this guy on the inside of the truck, there's already so much going on the driver's side that it was pretty easy to rule that out, leaving our best option being somewhere down low here on the passenger side. On the engine bay side, this is about where we need to be. We passed the harness through the firewall just outside of the fuel pressure regulator, routed everything behind the engine. Some of the stuff will split that way, some of the rest of it will split that way, which means we're set on how much harness we have to work with inside the car, and it ain't much. So what I'm thinking, being that this is a truck and we have plenty of storage room already, we can probably sacrifice our glove box and try to mount it somewhere in there. This is 100% gonna be our best option to keep it tucked up and out of the way, as long as we can make it fit. This is, I don't know, the third, maybe fourth revision of the whole mounting bracket for the ECU. It's taken far too long, but I think we got it done. Now, our whole bracket assembly is gonna go here. It uses one of the bottom mounts from the HVAC, and up top, it uses 2 bolts on the dash bar. Oh yeah, she ain't going nowhere. If this all works out like I hope it did, now, the glove box is just a false door. We drop it down, boom, access to our ECU. Now just to practice for the inevitable license and registration request.
1 second, officer.
This ECU plate also gave us an awesome spot to mount our coil drivers, and now that we have our engine harness plugged in, we can move on to the throttle pedal. Now originally this truck used a cable style throttle system, meaning our pedals physically connected to our throttle body via, well, a cable. But to control the electronic throttle body on the Demon engine, we're going to need to switch to a drive-by-wire system using this pedal I stole out of a Hellcat. This pedal uses a really standard flat 2-bolt mounting flange, which in most cars would be really easy to install. Of course though, that's not the case with this truck. The stock pedal mounts to some weird tube, so just like the ECU, we're gonna have to get creative. Well, we found out what the giant tube's for. It turns out, just like in the Dodge Vipers, these things have adjustable pedals. You hit a switch on the dash, they move forward or backwards. Now, we're not gonna be repurposing any of that. The only thing that I wanted to salvage is this black bracket. By reusing this one, we already have the 2 mounting points where the bracket mounts to the chassis. That means instead of building a bracket from scratch, we can just modify this one to accept this pedal.
I wish I saw it before you painted.
It really wasn't that bad. Truthfully, I'm really happy with the way this turned out. Now we just have to hope it fits as well as it did when we were on the test bracket. And yes, welding up this bracket was easier than installing it. But it ended up exactly where I wanted it. There's decent spacing between the gas and the brake pedals, and we still have that adjustability on the brake pedal, so if we need to move it out, we can. How's she feel? Well,
no.
I mean, you can test it. It's strong. I welded it.
It feels pretty good. I don't know about the steering wheel position, but
We'll fix that.
It's a truck, right?
It's a truck. Now that we got the pedal physically mounted, we gotta wire it so we can do, you know, throttle pedal things. And this is where Holley really made things easy on us. On our Hellcat engines, we have our main drive-by-wire throttle body. If we just had to worry about that, it'd be no sweat. Basically, any engine management system can control that. But on our Hellcat blowers, we have another smaller throttle body that operates an reverse of this one, meaning when we press the throttle and open this one fully, this one closes so we can achieve maximum boost pressure. Then when you let off, this one opens back up and operates basically the same way a blow-off valve does on a turbo car. The way that system operates is super simple, but controlling it with an aftermarket ECU instead of one that was made by Dodge specifically to do that, that's a problem. Holley apparently saw a need in the marketplace and made a dual throttle body wiring harness that's plug and play. One end goes into the Dominator, another connector goes to the gas pedal, then there's one connector for each of our two throttle bodies. And that makes one of the hardest parts of doing a Hellcat swap a non-issue. And next up on our list, our Holley dashboard, gauge cluster, digital display, whatever you want to call it. Just like our dual throttle body harness, the wiring for it's really easy. We have this one big connector that plugs into the back of the display, and the other end runs to our Dominator. This was our 6.8-inch Pro Dash display, and the only concern I have about it is that it's really small, especially when we compare it to the stock gauge cluster. Or worse yet, the 12-inch Pro Dash display we have in the race car. But to be fair, that was like $2,000, and we're already severely in the red on this project, so that one wasn't in the cards. So what we're gonna do is try to make 6 inches look a little bigger than it actually is. Instead of mounting our gauge pack way back there, we're gonna mount it up here, which to the naked eye at least makes it look, I don't know, at least 7 or 8 inches. To mount it, we're gonna use this bracket that I scored off eBay for 25 bucks, which is exactly why I don't feel bad at all about hacking it up to clear a parking light switch. Alright, now that we got it mounted, it really doesn't feel so small. And honestly, I don't even know if the 12-incher would fit in there, so I think this time it was 1,500 bucks well saved. Now that we took care of that stuff inside the cabin, we can get to actually wiring the truck. And we're gonna do it in the way we do pretty much everything around here, by stealing stuff from other cars.
Is those wires, it wasn't on like the scrap container? Or I'm mistaken?
Oh, you know the old saying, right?
What?
Yeah, one man's trash is another man's battery cable, right? I've heard that before. I'm not making it up on the spot. I suppose we'll go ahead and start with our easy one, the ground cable. We stole this one off a Camaro, and the only change we need to make to it is cut this big plastic connector off, grab a regular cable into it, and attach it to the frame. Easy enough. Now for the positive side, where we're using yet another battery cable that we stole off of Camaro, and to get it to the engine bay, we ran along the bottom of the bed, parallel with our fuel lines, and then all the way up the pinch well, which I've recently learned is much better suited for stuff like this as opposed to jacking. From there, I connected it to yet another charitable donation off a 5th gen Camaro SS in this battery junction point, which made it ultra easy to supply power to not only our engine bay fuse box, but our new single wire alternator and our starter. And that will do it for the entire charging system on the truck. Now, if you've ever wired a project like this, you know that realistically that's the easiest part of the job. Either way, after being down for over a month, I'm just happy to have some life in it. Hit the headlights.
It's on.
The light. No. So... Wrong switch. Yeah, that's not the kind of power I was looking for. Yeah, we got headlights. Obviously, we have windshield wipers as well.
I think this is some progress.
She's close. I mean, technically, we probably could crank it right now. But before we crank the truck, I want to crank out this MSD 4-channel relay box that's going to control our fuel pump, intercooler pump, radiator fan, and its identical twin. It's a super clean and compact unit that lets us run 2 power wires in, yet 4 out. It's going to simplify the job and give us a much cleaner end product. Everything that's going to be getting power from this unit, it's going to be triggered off our Dominator. So I think our best bet's to build some kind of bracket and mount it right in front of it. With our relay board in place, that means we are free to make wiring harnesses for our fuel pump, our intercooler pump, and then, of course, we have the radiator fans, which we had to do just a little bit of modification to. In typical radiator fan fashion, they came with these just janky plastic plugs. We cut those off and put this guy on from, well, I'll let you tell them where we got that.
So the gift that keeps on giving, the 5th gen Camaro.
The gift indeed. Now we have all the power wires for everything we just wired up inside the chassis. They're gonna get connected to the 4 top posts on this relay board. That way when our relays are triggered, those pumps and fans will turn right on.
So for powering our relays, this wire is going to supply input to the relays.
Power going to our relays, the ability to send power out. The last piece of the puzzle is triggering them so they do send power out. And we're gonna do that with this connector. This came with our Holley. It was completely open. You can pin it to your specifications, and every one of these open pins back there can be used for a different input or output. We just connect our new triggers to the proper place on the relay board, and then we can go into the Holley and say, for example, pin B3 is a ground output trigger for our heat exchanger pump. Or at least we will be able to do that once we power the Holley up. All right, now we all know that nobody likes to crank it dry, so one of the last things we have to do before we do crank it is lube everything up. And to do that, we needed to install our new low-carb dipstick, which with a little bit of modification, I was able to mount right next to the fuel pressure regulator. And one of the cool things about this dipstick is when you pull the actual dipstick out, the tube doubles as a fill point. It has this little attachment that goes inside, stick a funnel to it, and you can fill it without getting messy. All right, we're lubed up, we're ready to crank it, but as you can probably tell by the open wiring diagrams, the loose wiring leads we have laying around, things aren't going perfect. Technically, they're not going at all. These SRT10 trucks, they come from the factory with a fancy engine push to start switch. It's like you're firing up a fighter jet. I would like to keep it. My original plan with this whole deal is to keep the factory starter circuit that's already in the car. I mean, why not? We already have it. Why make something from scratch? But the issue we've ran into this morning is almost everything involved with the starting of the trucks ran through a connector known as C1. That connector C1, it looks an awful lot like, well, this connector here. This one's C2 or C3, I really don't know at this point, and all three of them plugged into the factory ECU. Now, the two of those connectors that we're missing, the issue is they are part of the engine harness. Specifically, an engine harness that's worthless if it's not connected to a stock engine and transmission. At this point, we spent, I don't know, 2 hours probing around, reading wiring diagrams, not only for our fuse box, but for our two remaining connectors that came off the engine harness over here, and we've essentially made it nowhere. So plan B, we make our own starter circuit.
Yes.
For simplicity's sake.
Yes,
correct?
For simplicity.
Which sounds a lot better than we can't figure out a mid-2000s Dodge starter circuit. But hey, this is the guaranteed way to get it done. Realistically, there's no downside to doing it this way. And hey, we even get to add to the giant mess we have going on in the carpet right now. But on cars like, say, the Macan here, ideally we keep the carpet, well, nice. Yeah, sure, you could pick up a set of universal rubber floor mats from the auto parts store that'll probably do more sliding around than they will do protecting your floor, or you could get a set of premium floor liners that look and fit like they were made just for your car from TuxMat. With TuxMat, not only is your floor going to be protected against things like wet or muddy feet, maybe you did a personal favor to mine and stepped in an oil pan 5 minutes before you have to head home for the day. Either way, TuxMat has you covered. No pun intended. As for installing them, it's super easy. They snap right into place just like the factory floor mats, which is another benefit of buying a floor mat that's made just for your chassis. Now that we got the mats in place, the last part of the job was going around and securing them to all the interior plastics to make sure they're not flopping around. The cherry on top of the whole thing is they made it so you can just scan the packaging and get taken right to their website where it shows you how to use all the different types of hardware. So guys, when you're ready to take your interior game to the next level, head on over to TuxMat.com or click the link in the description, enter your year, make, and model, and they'll get you squared away. Trust me, your car will thank you for it.
This is our push button start because it's an SRT model, and we want to make sure that we have 12 volts coming into it. That's then going to go out to our new relay.
It looks like we're not the first people to be hacking on this by any means.
Nope, somebody else, I don't know what they were doing. You want to reach over and press that button? Oh yeah, look at that.
Imagine how it works when you don't have to deal with all the security nonsense, factory wiring harness garbage.
That's a beautiful thing. That's why we simplify things.
Once again, simplicity. It's not because we couldn't figure it out. It's just simplicity. We couldn't figure it out.
So it's gonna be completely smooth, or we're gonna hear something like...
For reference, we're never gonna hear that sound come out of this truck. And two, Fernando, we're just cranking it. We're not starting. We got a little more work to do before we can actually start it. But according to the multimeter, when we hit this red button with the ignition on, so the starter worked. That didn't sound good at all. I don't know what that sound is, that creaking sound. That's a whole different issue. Our starter is not engaging our motor, and I don't know why. That's back on the lift. All right, back on the lift. To be fair, I don't even remember what car this starter came out of. I don't know how long it's been sitting around. We got it figured out wiring-wise, so a starter replacement, really not the end of the world. One really good thing about running this 4L80 with our fancy reed bell housing is you have access to pretty much everything underneath of it. There's no plates you have to take off. We can see it all. That's our flex plate. That's what the starter needs to engage. Our starter, it's over here on the passenger side. I suspect, even though we hear it click, that it's not extending. Tim, go ahead and hit it. Oh no, it is extending. I can't tell if it's misaligned or not extending far enough. Wow, the starter is not extending enough, I don't think. One more time. Hold it in. Yep. All right, because it's really hard to show you guys what's going on inside the transmission, I'm going to show you guys on a spare Hellcat flywheel and spare Hellcat starter. This one is a manual flywheel, but the basic idea is still the same. The automatic flex plate still has this tooth ring gear that goes around the outside, and what that does is when you hit your starter button, the teeth on the starter will kick out, engage your flywheel, and turn the engine over. As best I can tell, at least, the starter is acting perfectly fine, so that leads us to the next issue here. Typically on a flex plate or flywheel, the backside of it, it's going to butt right up against the crankshaft. But because we did a GM transmission on this, we had to do a little bit of adapting with a spacer plate that goes in between our flex plate and crank. And I think that we spaced it out just enough to make sure our starter can't touch our flex plate. As for what we're going to do about it, at this point, I genuinely don't know. All right, it's a new day and we got new solutions, which I do realize sounds positive, but, well, let me explain. This starter, it's identical to the one we have on the truck. It's the same as every other Gen 3 Hemi starter. Now, this starter is a brand new aftermarket version of, I don't know exactly what they're called, but it's an older Hemi starter. I guess that's the best way to put it. Technically, this is for a 1994 Dodge Dakota with a 5.2 liter. When we line the mating surfaces of these two starters up, the starter gear on our old school starter sticks out, well, about a ½ inch further than the Gen 3 Hemi, which is exactly what we need. Now, one of the benefits of using a reed bell housing on this build is it's designed to accept both these starters. Passenger side for our Gen 3 starter and driver side for our old school Dodge Dakota starter. So theoretically, we bolt this up, as I said, theoretically. The problem we have here is quite obvious. When we sent the car up to have the headers fabricated, it was not made with the driver's side starter in mind, and it's not even remotely close to fitting. All along, I assumed we're going to be able to use the passenger side starter, but you know what they say about assuming. Either way, at this point, we have two options. One, we can redo our entire header design and run that driver's side starter, or two, we can do a little bit of fabrication, if you want to call it that, and grind down our existing starter. In theory, at least, if we machine down the flange of this starter to be roughly the size of this one, it should push our starter gear out just far enough to engage our flywheel and cure our issue. We scribed two lines on the starter. One's 3/8 of an inch, the other's a ½ inch. Now, the risk we run here is if we machine this down too much, the starter ears could break off. It could simply snap off the car when it goes to engage the flywheel. Really, this is something that should be done by a machine shop, but we're, well, working in a junkyard, and I wanted to crank today, so all right, half the starter's in dust on the table, the rest is on the floor, some's in my lungs, but I think we got it straight.
I hope so. We're gonna find out. There's a little bit of precision here.
Some tells me that's not really precision, but
well, you know, around here. It's pretty good.
This is all eyeballed with a flap disc, and it works, I think.
Precision.
Yeah, I mean, take it from the ruler. This is precision machine work, so I guess if we need an engine built or something, we should do it in-house now. We don't have to worry about any of this machine shop BS.
We can handle it all.
So the machine works top-notch. The question is, did we machine enough? All right, so that's basically where that's supposed to sit. Looking up into the trans, it's kind of deceiving. It looks like it's fully engaged, but when you put a hand up there and feel it, it's realistically only engaged about that much. It's probably less than half. So I think we're gonna have to take off the rest of this material, which presents its own issue. The problem now is when we take this extra 1/8 inch of material off, we're also getting into the bearing retainer, if you want to call it that, here in the center of the starter. That lifts what this part of the gear rides on, and it's conceivable at least that we make it so thin that when we engage the starter, it simply breaks. But at this point, we don't have much of a choice, so if it breaks, and we'll cross that bridge if and when we get there. Once again, the grinding works pretty solid. It's a lot flatter than I thought it was going to be. Being flat's great and all, but once again, none of this matters if it doesn't work. So honestly, it looks like the engagement's about the same, even though we shaved off a significant amount more material off the face. So that can really only mean one thing. I guess when the starter gear pushes out, either the gear or this shaft's hitting the bell housing. The by the book way to figure out where it's hitting would be to, I don't know, put the gear in it, measure it, mark it, grind it, but we're gonna do it the fun way.
I think the best way to do it, the easiest way, is to reinstall the starter, hit start, and allow it to tell us exactly where it's gonna hit.
Hey, who knows? Maybe it'll even self-clearance or self-destruct. I guess that one's an option too.
Whose reaction say it all?
Yeah, so I expect two things to happen here. One, The engine should crank, it should turn over, that's good, but it's probably gonna make a horrendous noise as the starter shaft just slams into the bell housing. Hit it, I guess. That don't sound that bad.
That's not bad.
That doesn't sound bad at all. Go ahead and crank it. Oh. Okay. Trust me, I know to the naked eye that does not look good, but it's a steel gear going into an aluminum bell housing. It can technically self-clearance, and it didn't self-destruct. I think we might be onto something. And it just cranked, which is awesome. One other positive here is this ring gear. It was fully painted when we got it, and now based on the wear marks, you can see that our starter is engaging almost all the way through, which is exactly what we've been trying to accomplish this whole time. I know I've spent the better part of today inhaling aluminum dust and messing with the starter, but it cranks and it cranks well. Now we don't really have that much more to do so we can start it. The first of the last couple things we need to do before we can start it are two things that are probably quite critical. As you can probably see, there's no wiring going to our coils and just as little wiring going to our injectors. On the stock Demon engine harness, those two things are integrated into it, but on the Holley Dominator harness, it's set up so both the injectors and the coils are ran off sub harnesses. I gotta assume that's because it would make changing to a different injector or a different style coil pack 10 times easier. And while both these harnesses are technically at least supposed to be plug and play, I did have to do a little bit of modification to them because of the fact that we ran our engine harness through the firewall all the way over on the passenger side. It left us facing quite a familiar issue, and that we don't have enough length. The harnesses wouldn't reach around to the driver's side, but we already went through the trouble of extending them, and now they plug right in without issue. And now that we theoretically at least have spark and fuel, we got to make sure the truck's doing the right stuff with said fuel. On our engine harness, we have a connector for a fuel pressure sensor. On our fuel pressure regulator, we have a provision to take a fuel pressure sensor, and here I have a fuel pressure sensor, so I'm sure you can see where this is going. The reason why this one's so critical is if we were to lose fuel pressure in, say, a dyno pool or a run at the track, we'd pop our motor in a hurry. But with this, it's going to allow the ECU to see that we lost fuel pressure, and within microseconds, it'll cut everything and probably save us some motor. Next sensor up on the list are O2 sensors. Equally as important as the fuel pressure sensor, though in kind of a different way. Best way to think about this is oxygen sensors are measuring what's already happened in your engine. The fuel pressure sensor, that's measuring what's about to happen. From there, we just had to connect a couple loose grounds, install the noise filters on our ignition harness, which we permanently borrowed from a busted up Scat Pack motor, connect the power wires to our ECU, and then finally, well, until we find something else we missed, gas it up. Sweet smell of corn at 8 a.m. in the morning, right, Fernando?
That's 93, right?
It's not 93. Like everything else, we're running E85 in this car. We got an ethanol content sensor in here, which we pinned into the wiring harness. So no matter how much ethanol we have in it, the ECU will correct. It'll do its thing. It'll lower boost. I don't know how it works. It keeps the engine safe in case we have to, God forbid, put 93 octane in it at some point. Since we got it gassed up, the next thing on the agenda is to test out all that stuff we wired in earlier, which now, because we have the Holley powered, we can do directly through the Dominator. All those relays were triggering off the Dominator. Now we can just simply go in here and turn on, let's say for example, the fuel pump. And now is when I'd expect to see some type of a leak, but there's nothing up front. I don't see anything draining down from under the car either. The next one, we're gonna test our intercooler pump, and we're only gonna do this one for a split second because it's dry, there's nothing in it. We don't wanna damage the pump. Last two of them, fan number 1 and fan number 2. If I can get the radiator in here, there we go. We're golden on everything. It's nice when you wire things to work a certain way and it actually works that way. And I know it seems weird to be pulling a radiator out of the truck before we start it, but I just want to make sure it runs. We'll add all this stuff back in later. Now the very last piece of the puzzle before we can hit this start button and actually expect the engine to start for the first time is a little bit of tuning. We're getting a base map uploaded to it right now by Rick at Big 3 Racing. He's the same guy who tuned my Demon to 1,005 horsepower, so we're in good hands. He says it's time to hit the button.
it is way too quiet.
We built this one to be quiet. It's supposed to be quiet. If we don't like it, we'll hack the mufflers off later. But this went way too smooth. This is the easiest first start in a very long time to take place in this shop. I would explain to you guys what's going on here, but I genuinely don't know. Rick's handling all this.
I don't know how it's possible, but that idiot managed to put this thing together and not one single leak.
Because I actually tightened my fittings, thought. Unlike you. We're not going to get to see him in this video, but Rick, say hi to everybody. Everybody say hi to Rick. Thank Rick for helping us out with this thing.
Hey, I appreciate it. Please like, share, and subscribe.
He dropped my line for me. See, he's a pro at this YouTube thing. This was so uneventful that, like, I'm almost bored. Like, what do we do now? Like, should we break something so we have to fix it?
No.
Like, shouldn't there be some kind of an issue here? Best I can tell, there's no leaks. The only thing we messed with in the engine internally, of course, is the camshaft, but that was still plenty of opportunity for things to go wrong. We've only let this thing run like 30 seconds. It's cooled down a good bit. I think we got at least another 30 seconds in it, right, Fernando?
Yep.
Shut the hood real quick. Okay, this was 100% unplanned. The brakes aren't even bled, but we do have an e-brake. I don't have a good reason why not.
You got a bunch of stuff in the back.
I know there's probably a bunch of asterisks here, but that's technically run and drive in the same day, right, Fernando?
Is it done?
Well, clearly it's not done. We can all see that. Now, the funny part about this whole, running and driving the Demon truck thing is in most builds, this would be a massive accomplishment, and don't get me wrong, it is, but it's still just a stock engine. It works like it should work. There was really no question. It's not a new, fresh engine that we had built. Now is when the hard work begins. Now, in the next couple weeks, we have to make this thing run well, properly with brakes, drive on the highway, not run like it did today. We have to make it ready for the dyno and the racetrack. With that said, the only fitting way to celebrate these past couple weeks of hard work paying off, finally, I think is to get back inside, get right back to it.
Get it done.
Get it done. Yes, sir. Let's do it.
He's in the right way.
I'm out of the pedal upside down. Oh, okay. What the? What?
Is that luminous rain normal on Mopar engines?
It's all good.